What if I told you that um, the totally mundane thermostat on your living room wall and the chaotic anxiety tightening in your chest before a big meeting?
Oh, that is a terrible feeling, by the way.
Right, the absolute worst. But what if I told you that both of those things and the fundamental structure of the universe itself are actually all operating on the exact same underlying mathematical principles?
It sounds completely absurd when you say it out loud like that.
It really does. But today, we are basically tearing down the divide between human emotion and cold, hard system science. We're getting into a really dense, just radically fascinating excerpt titled Gnosis as Practical Structural Wisdom.
Yeah, and it is a heavy text, but so incredibly rewarding.
Exactly. And our mission for you in this deep dive is to explore a framework that integrates spirituality, psychology, and cybernetics.
Which is a pretty wild combination of fields.
Yeah, to say the least. But it's a framework that promises to completely overhaul how you understand knowledge, how you navigate your own internal emotional storms, and, how you interact with the complex systems that just dictate reality.
It really is a provocative text, mainly because it takes something we usually think of as like ethereal or mystical, and it grounds it right in the dirt of everyday mechanics.
Yes, the nuts and bolts of it all.
Right. It demands that we look at reality not as a collection of isolated objects or random feelings, but as an endless web of interconnected feedback loops.
Okay, well, let's address the elephant in the room right away, because we have to talk about the word itself. Gnosis.
It comes with a lot of baggage.
So much baggage. When you hear the word gnosis, you almost certainly picture this, like cinematic, mystical event.
A monk meditating on a mountaintop.
Exactly. The clouds parting, a sudden lightning bolt of divine insight, and poof, you instantly know the secrets of the cosmos.
The Neo in the Matrix moment. I know Kung Fu.
Yes. But this source comes out swinging against that entire concept. I mean, it emphatically states that gnosis is not an event. It is not a sudden aha moment.
Not at all.
So if it isn't an isolated flash of enlightenment, what on earth is it?
Well, that assumption, the mountaintop thing, is exactly what the text is trying to dismantle. We have this culturally ingrained, really binary concept of enlightenment.
Like an on-off switch.
Right. Before the lightning bolt, you were ignorant. After it, you're enlightened. But this framework defines gnosis as practical wisdom.
Practical being the operative word there.
Highly practical. Specifically, it is wisdom grounded in the ongoing, continuous recognition of structure.
Continuous, so it's something you're always doing.
Exactly. The text makes a crucial distinction here. It says that while gnosis is non-empirical in its method meaning, you can't measure it with a ruler or weigh it in a laboratory.
Sure.
It is absolutely not abstract in its function. It has a real, tangible, lived utility.
So it's functional. It's a tool, not just a state of mind where you float away from reality.
It's the exact opposite of floating away. It's plugging directly into reality.
Okay, but to understand what they actually mean by recognizing structure, we have to look at the three specific domains this text claims gnosis operates across. And honestly, this is where my brain initially hit a major speed bump.
The three lenses.
Yeah. The course material says gnosis requires the integration of spirituality, psychology, and this is the weird one, cybernetics.
It throws everyone off.
Cybernetics, I mean, you don't usually see ancient philosophical concepts sitting at the exact same table as the science of machines and computing.
It feels like a massive contradiction at first glance.
It really does.
But the text forces them together to make this brilliant point. It argues that all three of these disciplines, even though they use completely different vocabularies, are actually engaging with the exact same underlying reality.
Okay, wait.
They are all desperately trying to describe patterned relationships, feedback, and coherence within systems.
Okay, I need you to break down the actual mechanism there because that is a massive claim. The cruise control on my car makes perfect sense as a cybernetic system. It's a machine.
Right.
But human anxiety doesn't feel like a microchip. It feels like chaos. It feels biological. How does a rigid mechanical science like cybernetics map onto something as messy as human emotion?
Well, to see the connection, we have to strip cybernetics down to its absolute purest definition. We aren't talking about cyborgs or, artificial intelligence.
No Terminators.
You're no Terminators. Cybernetics provides the formal language for this entire framework. It's simply the science of how systems maintain themselves through feedback loops.
Right.
It's about how they adapt to changes in their environment and how they preserve their identity through constraints. Think about that cruise control you just mentioned.
Yeah, it keeps me at 65 miles an hour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It senses your speed, it adjusts the throttle, and it maintains a steady state despite the incline of the hill.
It's constantly adjusting.
Right. The mechanism is super simple, right? Input, measurement, adjustment, output. It is a system regulating itself to avoid collapse, or, in the car's case, to avoid a speeding ticket.
Okay, so cybernetics is essentially the rule book. It's the bare bones structural math of how things interact and stay balanced.
Exactly.
So then where does psychology step into that equation?
Well, psychology is observing those exact same systemic dynamics, but playing out inside you, inside a biological and emotional organism.
So I am the car in this analogy.
You are the car.
Yeah.
Psychology looks at how your perception, your behavior, and your nervous system all form a coherent system.
Let's ground this a bit. Give me a real-world scenario.
Okay. Imagine you are in a tense, escalating argument with a partner.
Oh, I don't have to imagine too hard.
Right, we've all been there. Cybernetically, this is what we call a runaway positive feedback loop. One person raises their voice, which acts as an input that threatens the system.
Okay, the environment changed.
Yes. The other person's nervous system registers that threat, and to protect itself, it spikes cortisol and prompts a defensive response. So they raise their voice louder.
Which then feeds right back into the first person as a new input, escalating the loop even further.
Exactly.
The constraint has failed, and the system is basically crashing.
Precisely. Psychology calls it an emotional trigger, or maybe an attachment wound. But structurally, mathematically, it is a cybernetic feedback loop losing its coherence.
Wow.
Your body's attempt to downregulate back to a calm state is the exact same mechanical principle as the thermostat trying to cool down a room. It is literally just a system trying to survive.
Okay, I am totally with you on cybernetics, mapping onto psychology. I can actually see the structural overlap between my nervous system and a thermostat now.
It's pretty wild once you see it.
It is. But then we introduce the third lens, which is spirituality.
Right.
If cybernetics is the mathematical rulebook, and psychology is how that rulebook plays out in our sweaty biological bodies, what functional purpose does spirituality serve here?
That's the big question.
Doesn't adding spirituality just kind of muddy the waters of a perfectly good systems theory?
And that is the trap most people fall into when reading this. They think spirituality is just mystical window dressing, like a nice philosophical bonus.
Yeah, exactly.
But in this framework, spirituality is the necessary foundation, because if we just stop at psychology and cybernetics, we are still treating these feedback loops as mechanical accidents or just biological quirks.
As meat machines bumping into each other.
Right. But spirituality, as defined by this text, is the profound recognition that this pattern itself, this relational coherence, is the absolute bedrock of reality.
Wait, so it's the realization that the universe isn't made of isolated things bumping into each other.
Yes.
It's actually constructed entirely out of relationships.
That is the pivotal leap. Spirituality recognizes that relational coherence isn't merely a localized function of an organism trying to survive an environment. It's not just a survival trick. It is the fundamental nature of existence, period. So integrating all three means you understand the formal math of the system.
That's cybernetics.
You observe how it regulates your own human experience.
That's ability. Yeah.
And you possess the deep reverence that this structural relationship is the organizing principle of the cosmos. That's the spirituality piece.
I see.
Gnosis is the integration of those three perspectives. It is the ability to see that universal structure regardless of which lens you happen to be looking through at the moment.
That is huge. Because if these three fields are truly just different lenses for the exact same underlying patterns, that completely shatters how we typically view our internal lives versus the external world.
It shatters it completely.
I mean, we usually draw a massive, just impenetrable wall between what happens inside our heads, our subjective reality, and what happens outside in the physical universe.
It obliterates that wall entirely. And the source is very aggressive about this, by the way.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Gnosis is presented as a fiercely holistic concept. It actively refuses to separate your inner experience from your external behavior or from the environment's structure.
So inside and outside are the same thing.
In this framework, subjective recognition, what you feel, think, and perceive internally, and systemic structure, how the external world mechanically operates, are not two different phenomena.
They're different expressions of the same organizing principles.
Yes. The text makes a point that we really need to just sit with for a second. It says that what we experience as an emotion, a cognitive thought, a physical behavior, or an environmental regulation are not independent layers stacked haphazardly on top of each other.
Right.
They are interconnected manifestations of the exact same relational patterns.
I really want to push on the practical mechanism of this because it's a totally mind-bending concept for anyone listening who is used to separating their feelings from the physics of the room they are sitting in.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
Let's go back to the anxiety example. I feel anxiety in my chest. It is visceral, it is messy, and it feels deeply, deeply personal.
Of course.
The thermostat on my wall is a plastic box measuring degrees. This text argues they are both just system regulation.
Structurally, yes.
Okay, so if I accept that my anxiety is just a relational pattern, how does that practically change the way I navigate, say, a Tuesday afternoon when I'm completely overwhelmed at work?
And this brings us right to the core utility of practical structural wisdom.
Let's hear it.
When you view your workplace anxiety through the traditional isolated lens, you likely see it as a personal failing. You think, I am an anxious person, or my brain is malfunctioning.
Oh, absolutely.
You treat the emotion as this abstract dark cloud that has descended upon you, which leaves you feeling incredibly powerless. You are just the victim of a feeling.
Right, and the usual response is to either suppress it or try to find some psychological catharsis to bleed off the pressure. Like, I need to go vent to a friend.
Exactly. But if you view that exact same anxiety through the lens of Gnosis as a cybernetic relational pattern, your entire approach shifts.
How so?
You stop looking at the anxiety as an isolated object and you start looking for the feedback loops.
Oh, wow.
You start asking systemic questions. What specific input in my work environment is causing this internal system to upregulate? Is there a boundary, a constraint that is failing here?
Like me answering emails at midnight.
Perfect example. How is my own behavior, maybe over-apologizing or taking on too many tasks, feeding back into the stressor and amplifying the loop?
Oh, that is so empowering because it shifts you from being a passive victim of an emotion to being an active systems engineer of your own life.
That is the lived reality of Gnosis. Gnosis isn't just knowing the abstract theory that systems exist. I mean, I could explain systems theory to you all day, but that isn't Gnosis.
Right, reading the manuals and driving the car.
Exactly. Gnosis is the lived, practical capacity to recognize the pattern of your anxiety as it unfolds in real time. It's the ability to see your own role in the feedback loop and to adjust your behavior to remain aligned with the broader system's coherence.
It is active regulation.
Yes.
And, this really highlights why the conventional catharsis model of psychology often fails us. Like, we think that if we are angry, we need to punch a pillow or scream in our car to get it out of our system.
The pressure cooker model.
Exactly. We treat the emotion like steam in a pressure cooker. But cybernetically, what are we actually doing when we punch a pillow?
Oh, it's terrible structurally.
Right. We are physically enacting violence, which sends an input back to our own nervous system that says, hey, we are in a violent environment.
Yes.
We're actually feeding the positive feedback loop and upregulating our own nervous system even further.
That is a phenomenal example of lacking Gnosis. The pillow-punching approach is completely blind to the structural reality of the feedback loop.
It's making it worse.
Gnosis would be recognizing that escalating loop of anger, seeing that the system is demanding downregulation and choosing an input like walking away or changing your breathing. That introduces a new constraint to stabilize the system.
Okay, so Gnosis is this lived, active ability. It is highly, highly practical, which naturally brings up the next logical question for you listening.
How do you get it?
How do you actually acquire it? Because if it is not a lightning bolt of divine intervention, and we've established you can't just read a Wikipedia page about cybernetics to get it.
Yeah.
What is the mechanism for attaining this wisdom?
Well, the source is completely uncompromising on this point.
Okay.
Because Gnosis is an ongoing, continuous recognition of structure. It develops exclusively through deep engagement.
Engagement.
Yes, not through abstraction.
Meaning you absolutely cannot think your way into it.
No, you cannot sit in an armchair, philosophize about the interconnectedness of the universe, and achieve Gnosis. In fact, abstraction is actually the enemy of Gnosis here.
Oh.
It is refined solely through continuous attention to relationship. You have to actively thrust yourself into the messiness of life and pay fierce attention to how your actions feed back into the systems around you.
So you have to be participating.
Fully participating. You have to observe how patterns repeat in your relationships, your career, your own mind, and carefully note how coherence is either maintained or disrupted by the choices you actually make.
It requires getting your hands dirty. You have to actually be in the arena.
Exactly.
And crucially, the text points out that this isn't something you acquire once and then just put on a shelf. It has to be stabilized over time as a consistent mode of perception.
Stabilization is key. It is a muscle that must be continually flexed.
So what does this actually look like when you are learning it? Because as I was reading the notes, the only thing I could compare it to is learning how to ride a bicycle.
That's a great analogy.
Right. If we look at bike riding through the lens of abstraction, you could theoretically read 100 textbooks detailing the physics of balance, the gyroscopic effect of the spinning wheels, the center of gravity, the exact angular momentum required to stay upright.
You can memorize all the math perfectly.
You could be a genius at bike physics.
Yeah,
But does that give you the gnosis of riding a bike?
not at all. The second you get on the seat, you will fall over.
Yeah, exactly. Because theoretical knowledge of momentum is completely useless to you if your body cannot physically feel the balance point.
Right.
To acquire the gnosis of riding a bike, you have to engage. You have to get on the seat, push the pedals, and feel the physical feedback loop of leaning and steering.
You have to experience the wobble.
You experience the wobble, you make a physical correction, you overcorrect, you fall, you skin your knee. But over time, through direct engagement with the feedback loop, your nervous system learns the structure of balance.
It internalizes the structure.
Yes. And eventually that balance becomes a stabilized mode of perception. You don't consciously think about the physics of the gyroscopic effect anymore. You just intuitively know how to lean. You just ride.
I think that captures the essence of the text perfectly. Gnosis is finding and maintaining that balance point in the infinitely more complex systems of your daily life.
Yeah.
It is the ability to feel the wobble in your romantic relationship, or the wobble in your team dynamic at work, or even the wobble in your own mental health, and intuitively knowing exactly how to lean.
Knowing what constraint to apply.
Exactly. Knowing what feedback to alter to maintain systemic coherence.
I just love that phrasing, feeling the wobble and knowing how to lean.
Yeah.
But this brings up a massive paradox in the source material.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, because gnosis demands this active, visceral engagement in the feedback loops of life. It inherently changes how, and even if it can be taught or communicated to another person.
It is the ultimate frustration for an educator.
I can imagine.
This is exactly why the source argues that gnosis inherently resists being reduced to discrete statements, formulas, or rules. You cannot condense gnosis into a corporate seminar.
Or a TED Talk.
Right. You cannot write a best-selling 10 easy steps to practical structural wisdom self-help book. It just won't work.
Because gnosis isn't a collection of facts you can memorize.
It is an orientation toward reality.
Ah.
The text is very explicit about this. Gnosis cannot be fully transmitted through description alone.
Which is wild for a text that is describing.
I know, the irony. But why? Because the very definition of the word in this framework depends on your direct personal recognition of structure as you encounter it in real time.
So it's completely experiential.
To use an analogy, try describing the exact feeling of the color red to someone who has been blind since birth.
You can't.
Or try describing the precise millivolt electrical signals you need to send to your calf muscles to walk across a tightrope.
Oh, right. You can explain the physics of the tightrope tension all day long,
Yeah.
but you cannot transmit the muscle memory required to not fall to your death.
Exactly. If you treat gnosis as a static fact to be memorized for a multiple choice test, or a fleeting mystical feeling to be chased, you are demonstrating a fundamental misunderstanding of its nature.
It's not an object you hold.
It is not an object you hold, it is a way you move through the world.
Okay, well, I have to step in and push back on this because I am sure you listening are having the exact same existential crisis I'm having right now.
Let's hear it.
If the text literally says gnosis cannot be fully transmitted through description, then what on earth are we doing right now in this deep dive?
It's a fair question.
I mean, if I cannot teach you gnosis through a script, are we just pointing vaguely at the underlying mathematical patterns of the universe and hoping you suddenly see the code of the universe floating in the air? Have we just wasted the last 15 minutes?
No, it is the most vital question to ask when studying this text. If it can't be described, why did the author write the excerpt and why are we dissecting it? But our discussion isn't futile. What we are doing here, and what the text itself is attempting to do, is providing the orientation. We can meticulously describe the cybernetic concepts.
We can point out the thermostat.
Right. We can map out the psychological feedback loops of an anxiety attack. We can point directly to the underlying structural reality of the universe. But we are only handing you a map.
And as the old saying goes, the map is not the territory.
Exactly. We can tell you where the mountains are, where the valleys dip, and where the treacherous rivers flow. But the actual gnosis only sparks into existence when you, the listener, step outside, physically walk the territory, and feel the dirt under your own boots.
So our description gives you the vocabulary to recognize the patterns, but the wisdom is forged exclusively through your capacity to actively navigate that reality.
You have to get on the bike and ride.
You have to get on the bike. So let's bring all of these moving parts together, because we have traversed some incredibly dense philosophical and mechanical ground today.
We really have.
What is the ultimate takeaway from Gnosis as practical structural wisdom?
Well, it's that gnosis isn't magic.
Right. It is not a mystical lightning bolt that strikes you while you are passively waiting on a mountaintop for the universe to explain itself to you.
Yeah.
It is practical structural wisdom.
It is the continuous, gritty, practical alignment with the feedback loops of your daily reality. It is the ultimate bridge.
The bridge between what?
It connects the macro-level mechanical cybernetics of the universe with the intimate, messy psychology of your own mind. It is the profound realization that the cosmos and your internal emotional state are not operating in two different realities.
Wow.
They are functioning on the exact same principles of pattern, relationship, and coherence.
So as you go about your life this week, we challenge you to apply this orientation.
Yes.
Pay attention to the patterns that are constantly repeating in your life. Stop viewing your emotions as isolated events and start looking at how your actions are feeding back into your personal systems.
When you feel that tightening of anxiety, or when you find yourself in a recurring argument with a friend, look for the underlying feedback loop. Ask yourself, where is the coherence in the system and where is the disruption?
Step out of the abstraction of your own thoughts and lean into the engagement of the structure.
Look for the wobble.
Look for the wobble. But we will leave you with this final, completely provocative thought to mull over on your own. The source text tells us that Gnosis is a sustained alignment with the patterns that generate our experience. It is all about maintaining coherence within a system.
Right.
But what happens when you step back and realize that a pattern you are perfectly aligned with, like a toxic relationship, a terrible work habit, or a really bad coping mechanism, is actually deeply harmful?
Oh, that's a brilliant question.
If Gnosis is fundamentally about recognizing structure and understanding feedback. Exactly. Think about that the next time you try to break a deeply ingrained habit. Will you just passively wait for a lightning bolt of motivation to strike? Or will you start actively rewiring the thermostat of your own systems?